Hello, and welcome to The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. Addiction to tech is a topic that resonates with almost everyone. We live in a world where screens and devices are ubiquitous, and our smartphones are often the last thing we look at before we go to bed and the first thing when we wake up. What toll has this taken on our work lives, our families, and society overall? And what about our children? Well, dozens of states are now blaming technology giants like Meta for the mental health crisis in our youth and are suing to come up with a fix. Our guest is Adam Alter, professor of marketing at New York University Stern School of Business and an expert on addictive technology and what we can do about it. Thanks for joining us, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start by defining an addiction to tech. Is there a generally accepted metric here? So many hours a day online, on your phone, on a specific app. What's the yardstick here?
We talk traditionally about substance addictions, but here this is a behavioral addiction. So there's no substance that you're ingesting into the body. But if your phenomenological experience, in other words, what it feels like subjectively to use the screen is similar in certain ways, then I think it rises to the level of addiction. And for me, that is where you feel compelled to return to that device over and over again, despite the fact that you recognize that it's not ultimately very good for you, that it's perhaps harming you socially or physiologically, physically, or psychologically, or financially, or in some other way. And so that's what you see with substances when people become addicted. They recognize that those substances are on some level not very good for them, but they return to them over and over again.
Well, I do want to talk about the physiology of addiction. What gets triggered in our brains when we receive likes or engagement on platforms like Instagram or TikTok?
Yeah, there's a lot of research on how our brains respond to these what are essentially pleasurable experiences. I think what's tricky about this is that if you look at a child who has ice cream, the brain looks similar in its behavior to what you'd see when a drug user uses a drug or when a teenager gets a like on Instagram. So we see a lot of the same neural signatures. So what's difficult about this is you can't ask in isolation what's happening in the brain without asking what's also happening subjectively. What does it feel like to engage in that experience? Because obviously there's a very big difference between a child enjoying an ice cream and between that and a heroin addict, or between someone using an Instagram, an app to see a like on an Instagram post. So I think it's useful to ask what's going on in the brain, but I think it tells us only part of the picture. And so it's really important to marry that picture of what's going on in the brain to some sort of experience. And that's why I think you need both of those things.
Well, let's talk about youth specifically now. Addiction to tech can start at a very early age. Following the recent lawsuits brought by 41 states against Meta, New York Attorney General Letitia James said in a statement, quote, Meta has profited from children's pain by intentionally designing its platforms with manipulative features that make children addicted to their platforms while lowering their self-esteem, unquote. From an educational perspective, what can schools do to address the issue of addiction without losing the benefits of learning both through tech and about it?
Yeah, I think this raises a very important point, which is that screens themselves are just vehicles for delivering content. They can deliver math programs, they can deliver language learning programs, they can deliver all sorts of very useful information. And in fact, during the pandemic, the only way kids could learn when they were forced out of schools by the pandemic was to use screens. So there was huge utility there. I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I think it's worth keeping in mind that there is a tremendous amount to be gained from having the right things, the right platforms on our screens. It's just that it's very easy for that to bleed into other areas and into experiences that are much less functional, less valuable, less useful. And so I think the important thing for schools to do in particular, and also for parents to do, is to think about what each separate app is doing, what each platform is doing. There's a huge difference between a 12 or 13 or 14-year-old spending time on, say, Instagram or Facebook or YouTube versus, say, whatever apps are being used to teach at school. And so just to say screens are bad, I think, is a sort of generally unproductive knee-jerk reaction. And it's important to be really precise and nuanced about what each platform is doing and what the benefits and what the costs are. So you can work out, based on the balancing of those benefits and costs, whether there might be some utility to some of the experiences we're having. But I think one of the biggest problems, especially with these social media platforms, is that they capitalize on the specific weaknesses and foibles that are associated with the teen brain and with the childhood brain, which is that the self-control function is not fully established yet, that it's much harder to resist temptation and to exert self-control when you're a child or a teen than when you're an adult. It's hard for adults, but it's borderline impossible for kids to do that.
Well, you mentioned parents. Is there just a need for tough love when it comes to children and technology use?
Yeah, I mean, I think on some level there is, but I also think it's incredibly difficult. I'm a parent, I have young kids. They're not teenagers yet, they're younger than that. But one thing that happens when you have kids is you notice very quickly that if they are the only ones not doing something, all their friends are on some platform, but they aren't, that's an instant wedge that comes between them and their friends. And so you're sort of put in this position as a parent where you either say, I want you to be isolated from your friends and to do something that's different, which is hard. It's hard for kids when they're trying to establish themselves socially. Or you use tough love and you say, you know what, it's more important that I preserve the integrity of the experiences you're having and say to you, you cannot do this thing no matter how many of your friends are doing it. The point is that as parents, we've been put in this very difficult and borderline impossible position. And I think that's the problem here, that it's incredibly difficult to be a good parent in every possible way when you're being forced to choose between depriving your kids of social experiences where they are getting to enjoy an experience that their other friends are having, and and just saying we'll let you use anything you like and be exposed to any content you like, even though we know that content isn't great for you. So there is no position here for parents that is win-win, and I think that's what's so tricky for a parent now.
Okay, so let's pivot to working adults. Those of us with white collar jobs spend most, if not all of our time online every day. Can spending hours online every week mask the presence of a tech addiction?
Yeah, I think this comes down to what you're doing on the screen. It's obviously not good to be sedentary for hours and hours and hours a day. We know there are a huge number of problems that come from that. It's not great for your eyes to be staring at a screen the whole day. There are all sorts of things you're supposed to do to rest your eyes, to look off into the distance, things like that. But all of that aside, if what you're doing when you're looking at a screen is not inherently unhealthy, say it's part of your job, you have to type, you have to look at the screen, you have to engage with people during meetings and so on. That doesn't suggest that you have an addiction. In fact, if anything, doing a lot of that makes a lot of people say, I don't want to spend as much time on screens when it's leisure time, because I'm spending so much of my workday on screens. So I think they're separate experiences. Some people will go home after 8 hours in front of a screen and go right back to a different screen. Maybe it'll be a tablet, or it'll be a phone or something like that, or they'll watch TV. And then that'll be the addiction part of things. But what you're doing at work it's really mostly a utility. And I think it's just the way the workplace has been oriented today in 2023 is such that we are essentially forced to spend that amount of time in front of screens. That doesn't mean we're addicted. I don't think it's healthy either, but I wouldn't say it's an addiction.
Well, a lot of people turn to gaming as a stress reliever. How can you tell the difference between recreational gaming and a serious gaming addiction?
Yeah, I mean, I think games can be, and very often are, incredibly good for us. They're beneficial. They allow us to have social experiences, albeit remotely. They are just a good way to unwind. Sometimes they're very good for our cognitive development. They keep us sharp, they engage us. I think they have a lot of really positive benefits. But I think the problem comes in when games start to crowd out other really important aspects of life. Are you gaming but not spending time with kids or with your friends or with your loved ones, family members? If that starts to happen, that's a problem. Are you gaming so much that you're not sleeping as much as you should? Are you gaming so much that you're not working as much as you should when you should be working and getting things done? So I think it's, as always, the question has to be, when we look at the pros and cons of this experience, are you mostly extracting the good from the act of gaming, or is it becoming a negative? Is it creeping into negative territory? And for that, everyone needs to run his or her own sort of individual audit. And just to say, I'm playing, is it an hour a day, 2, 3, 4 hours? That starts to be concerning. That probably means there are other things I could or should be doing that I'm not doing. And it's worth running those little, mental audits from time to time to get a sense of your usage patterns.
Well, Adam, tech brings convenience, efficiency, and a feeling of connectedness to our everyday lives. What are some tools to help us manage our use of tech in order to establish a healthy balance?
Yeah, I think what we're essentially trying to do is establish habits that are healthy with respect to our tech usage. And the best way to establish a habit that's healthy is to construct an environment around yourself that isn't laden with temptation. So we know that about 75% of adults in the United States can reach their phones 24 hours a day without moving their feet. So if I wake you up at 3 a.m., your phone's probably right there. If I ask the average adult at any time in the day, where's your phone? It's in the pocket, or it's on the desk, or it's next to you when you're watching TV. And if you're going to create a situation where this temptation is right there, within arm's reach all the time, and it's tempting, you're going to be tempted and you're going to eventually lose self-control and you'll reach for the device. But if instead you say to yourself, you know what, 2 hours before bed, 1 hour after I wake up in the morning, and during meals, I don't want my phone nearby. I'm going to put it in a jar or a drawer or a different room or whatever. People have different ways of dealing with this. But as long as you develop that habit, first of all, you'll find that you look forward to that part of the day. There's something quite liberating about that once you've established it. But also, you develop this habit of certain times of the day, 3 or 4 hours of the day, they are tech-free times. And there's great benefit to that. You can also tether it to exercise. A lot of people find getting outside and moving their bodies without the presence of technology is really also liberating. It lets their minds wander in a way that they don't otherwise normally during the day. So there are a few things we can do, but I think the golden rule here is carve as much space in time each day where the device is not really on your person, and you'll find that it's easier to resist it that way.
What's the most important thing that you hope listeners walk away from this conversation with?
I think it's interesting. I've been studying this for a long time, but over the last decade or so, I've seen people generally, everyday people, become much more mindful about how they use screens. They're thinking about screen use. They're thinking about what they're using, the apps, the benefits of those apps, the kinds of technologies they're using in a way that they certainly weren't a decade ago. And I think that's the most important thing, is not to use tech mindlessly, but to ask yourself, what are the benefits that I'm deriving from my tech patterns, my usage patterns? What are the costs and drawbacks? What am I missing out on? If I weren't using this platform now at this time of day, what else would I be doing? What experience is my child having watching me use it if I'm doing it in front of my children? What am I modeling for them? What's their experience of screens if they're using screens, and so on? So I think having a list of questions and running a sort of unofficial audit from time to time is the most valuable thing we can do.
Adam, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.